I'm Miles, and this is Sword and Horde Hobbies. For my first video, I'm going to try and make a full 10th edition board of WTC style Necron terrain out of Megablocks. Kids' giant Legos, which first caught my eye for their modularity and their size. They're a bit on the thicker side compared to MDF terrain, but I really think they can turn into something really cool. First things first, I have to sort all of this mess that I just made. And while I'm sorting these out to see how many of each I've got, I'll explain a little more of what I'm hoping to make with these and some of the limitations I initially found. I've heard WTC used to define terrain before, and I have to admit I've started to use it to describe 40k terrain without actually knowing what WTC stands for. It's like that one saying, like, I know it when I see it. I just started seeing stuff and saying, oh, that's a WTC. Oh, that's a WTC. Hold on one second. World Team Championship. Huh. I'm gonna have to figure out the background there. Anyways, when I see pictures of WTC terrain online, I'm usually looking at 1 to 3 story L and I-shaped ruins, mainly used for blocking line of sight, first and foremost. Compared to like other building ruins that you usually see at your hobby shops, they've got larger kind of second floors or third floors, and they have more of like a footprint, like a square footprint. WTC terrain, kind of from what I understand, is just kind of the L's and the I's. It's just the walls, just like the corner ruins that people kind of joke about with 40k especially. With the blocks sorted, I started assembling. I'm looking to build ruins that fit the size footprints as laid out by Games Workshop's terrain guides, while having a varying style throughout. Some with the second floor, different heights, different shapes, that kind of thing. After building came the gluing, and I have to say I initially thought about gluing the insides where the nubs connect, but I ended up gluing the seams of the blocks with this Gorilla Glue. And while the glue tends to pool a bit, I ended up leaving that on as it pooled randomly and inconsistently. So it just kind of added to the texture in the end. It just kind of looked like this kind of mortar, like spilled mortar on the sides, which, I don't know, I really liked it for the texture. And boom, the glue held together well. At this point, there are 2 things that are keeping this terrain from reaching its grim dark potential. The rainbow colors of all the different blocks, and the top nubs, which just scream Lego Megablock. Again, maybe I could work with this in some other type of terrain, but I don't know. I can't. I gotta get rid of them. I decided to take a crack at the nubs first, so I whipped out my Dremel and my assorted grinding bits, and I got to work. Pro tip: if you find yourself in the same situation, just use a hobby saw or like a small reciprocating saw. I was absolutely covered in plastic dust and bits and had to wear a bunch of stuff over my face and my eyes the whole time. It took forever. It was messy, and there absolutely has to be a better way to do this. But I persevered, and it paid off. I flattened out the tops of the ruins, so now models can stand on top and look on over, and it's not as readily apparent as to what this are, or what these were in a past life, I should say. But now I had the problem of all of the perfectly spaced out craters on top of my buildings, where you can see down into the nubs below from the other blocks. My gut reaction was to bust out my milliput and get the covering. I wanted the texture to be relatively uneven, to simulate a weathered, kind of eroded look. I mean, Necrons aren't really known for being awake for the last 100,000 million years, so they can't really take care of their infrastructure. So I started milliputting the top, and I used up the whole box and only covered a fraction of my terrain. I crunched the numbers, and it was going to be pretty expensive to milliput out the entire kit, so I switched gears to a more cheaper by the ounce option I've seen other hobbyists online use and swear by, and it's the DAS clay. It was definitely the most cost-effective option and was great for what I was going for. It did take a bit longer than the milliput to set, but it only added another day of curing time. After a bit of sanding touch-ups, once they were dry, the terrain was looking good. Okay, second to last task was to add texture to the very flat Megablocks. Completely optional, but I think worth the extra effort. Okay, big disclaimer here. Do this step last after priming. Learn from my mistake. Do this after priming. Prime first, then glue on texture. So I slathered the terrain in PVA glue and I sprinkled on a mix of dirt and chicken grit, which is just kind of small, fine rocks. It was messy, it was sticky, but again, it was worth it in the end. Okay, time to tackle the final problem. Painting over the rainbow blocks. The rainbow has got to go. After a little rattlecan priming of black and brown, it absolutely did the trick, and these are looking so much better. Way more grimdark. Let's go back. Remember my disclaimer before? This is where it comes into play. Here's where I made the biggest mistake of the project. I added texture to the Megablocks before priming. As you're going to see from here on out, whenever any little fleck of grit falls off the terrain from either regular movement, handling, bumping, that sort of thing, there is now like a Technicolor spot in place of where the rock was, which just sticks out like a sore thumb from the black and the brown paint. Live and learn. Final touches from here on out are just brush painting, and then we can mark these good to go. First, I dry brushed some gray and white in a downward motion across the ruins, gray towards the middle and white towards the top to kind of simulate a light effect. And finally, the hallmark Necron tier green glow. I did say this was Necron terrain, right? I've done nothing Necron about this terrain up to this point. I started with my darker green and I followed the seams of the Megablock bricks to make kind of geometrical square and rectangular shapes. I was kind of limited from making diagonal lines since I opted for this route, but still came out with some really cool symbols, and it took the guesswork out of what I was going to do and how I was going to paint it. My initial paint layer of darker green was a bit slapdash and a bit sloppy, but it was kind of to get that nice irregular base coat so that from a distance, as I kind of work my way in, I'll use the lighter greens towards the middle to kind of give it this glow effect. So it's not just kind of the perfectly painted lines, it's kind of more, I don't know, irregular, kind of like a glow, I don't know, a glow thing. I don't know. So yeah, next I slowly built up to lighter and lighter greens, getting more toward the center of the seam with each coat. And voila, time for the final reveal. All in all, I think the project came together pretty close to how I originally envisioned it, and is that not the great white buffalo we're all chasing? I had a blast, but I might scale back from doing a whole board build for my future videos. Really hit the ground running here. The final thing I'm going to try and do here is kind of spray matte varnish all of the pieces to hopefully kind of seal in some of the grit to stop them from falling off and flaking off as easily, to stop the rainbow Technicolor sparkles that are now throughout my terrain. If you saw a faux pas or you have any advice on a more efficient way to do something you saw here, please leave it in a comment below. I'm still sort of waddling my way into the waters of scratch building, and I love all of the niche tips and tricks that hobbyists tend to pick up. I mean, everyone tends to have some way of doing something, and it might just be that much better than the way that I'm doing something. Anyways, thanks for watching.